Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
Hey, it's Daryl. Team Common is currently working on our transition to a weekly show. We'll be back this summer with new episodes. In the meantime, here's one from our archives.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. There's a new report out today that examines the evolution of Boston's Black population. It's called Great Migration to Global Immigration, a Profile of Black Boston. In the report, the research center Boston Indicators, which is part of the Boston Foundation, and Embrace Boston look at historical trends and data from Boston's Black households to help us understand what it really means when we say Black Boston. James Jennings is a professor emeritus of urban and environmental policy and planning at Tufts University and co-author of the report, and he is here to tell us more about it. James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So your research shows an increase in Greater Boston's Black population over the last 40 years, and much of that is outside of the city. Tell me about what you found.
Well, a number of things, but along this point, Boston is no longer the name of the game in terms of the Black population in Massachusetts. In 1980, for example, 76% of all Blacks in Massachusetts lived in Boston. Today, that figure is 36%. And that is a result of greater diversity reflected in the Black population.
Mm-hmm. And who's all included in that population?
When you look at the changes in the Black population, what you see is a major increase in its diversity, its ancestries. And as I mentioned, this diversity has always been part of the Black community, but not to the extent that we see today, the explosive growth of people who are new to this country, and also people, Blacks, who now also identify with other ethnicities and ancestries. And so you may have someone who will define him or herself as Black in terms of race, but now increasingly will also say, but I'm also Latino, Latina. And so that has added a lot of oomph to Black population growth patterns. When you look at what we think is a truer picture of the Black population, then the numbers are actually going up, and going up faster in the greater Boston region than in Boston.
Yeah, like you said, that's a more recent development, right? Like in the 80s, 76% of Massachusetts Black population was in Boston, and now 36%, right? But, you know, the surrounding communities has a large Black community, right? Large Black communities. So what's behind that?
One factor is housing costs in Boston.
Okay.
When you look where the Black population is growing, it's places like Brockton, Stoughton, Avon. And by the way, this growth in Greater Boston is not evenly distributed. There's still many cities and towns that there are not too many Black people walking around in the streets, you know. So there's just a few cities in the Greater Boston area. But certainly housing prices in Boston, and also when you look at the immigration from the Caribbean, from African countries, that's also a factor in this growth. If you look at a few years ago, for example, let me say a few decades ago, when you said Somali, there was just a handful. Now in Boston, and especially Greater Boston, Somalis are growing in numbers. And this is also the case for Nigerians. These are parts of the African diaspora that have started to come to Boston over the last several years. And again, mostly in the Greater Boston area.
Like you've been saying, the population is very diverse.
Yes.
Tell me about the different backgrounds and places of origin of the people you studied. You know, you mentioned some before, but tell me about those folks and how it's changed over time.
Right. So the report looks at what we call multi-generational Blacks.
Yep.
And by that we mean Blacks, African Americans, who have roots either in the South or have family who have roots in the South and came to the North, places like Boston, but not only Boston, throughout the Great Migration. So that's one group. Another group is Jamaicans. Another group, Nigerians, Haitians also, and Cape Verdeans. Some of this is not new, but it's just the explosive nature of the growth.
Right.
The other group that we looked at is Afro-Latinos. That is blacks, such as myself, who choose black, always identified as black, but always said, but I'm also Latino, Puerto Rican to be specific. And that group has exploded. In the year 2010, for example, there were 61,000 Afro-Latino Latinas in Massachusetts. That represented 12% of the entire black population. By 2020, just 10 years later, that number, 61,000, grows to more than 95,000, 14.3% of the total black population. I have to emphasize, the presence of Afro-Latinos, Latinas, while we see an explosive growth, also has long historical roots in this country. But it's a group that's remained invisible because to a certain extent, race in America has always been about black, white, or Hispanic. And so when we approach race in such static terms, we lose a lot of the important nuances and data that really gives us a better understanding of what the black population is today.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. What did your research find about the legacy of racism and disinvestment and how that's impacted Black people?
Well, of course, it's impacted Black people in major ways. And I mentioned some cities and towns that still do not have a strong Black presence. Black people are not moving into certain cities and towns. And I think that also reflects a legacy of segregation and zoning that basically kept some people out. What's important to note is that Black people, African Americans, have always been on the forefront of fighting and challenging racial inequality and inequities. And that's still going on. But in an interesting way, it's that struggle over decades that we've seen that has become a beacon for other people of color, other Blacks from other parts of the world to come to Boston because something is happening in Boston that is allowing us to move forward. The report ends with 7 questions. One of the questions that we think emerges from this report, and I can't answer it, is what are the implications of this data for reparations as the city and the state and many other places move towards reparations as a policy, as a strategy, atonement, or whatever? What does this data imply about how we should be strategizing and thinking about reparations as we move forward?
Yeah, you bring up reparations. What did you find in regards to socioeconomic problems, income and wealth and economic mobility?
So there are some differences among what we call the Black subpopulation groups. Nigerians, for example, Black Nigerians have very high schooling levels. If you look at Cape Verdeans, the entrepreneurship rate is a little bit higher than other groups. If you look at foreign-born Blacks, their median household income is slightly larger, bigger than people who've been here for generations. And so there are some differences. But what we also found, and we're not the first to report this, that even with those differences, the context is still massive racial wealth gaps. So you can look at any of these groups and they still are in a context where there's a racial hierarchy that we still have to challenge. But if I may, back to reparations, and I said I don't have any answers, and I don't, but what this shows, African Americans have been almost uniquely discriminated against in terms of racial wealth gap, in terms of enslavement. But today, when you have this Black population diversity, how do we incorporate that into a sound reparations strategy or policies?
Why is this work so important to you? Why did you want to be involved in this research?
Well, one, there's so much ignorance about the Black experience in this country that it's important to uncover it.
It surprises me so much. I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but I find myself always surprised.
Yeah, always. I know what you mean. And so one motivation is digging for more accuracy about what the Black experiences are. And I think that's important for our fellow Americans to understand. But another really has to do with, again, continuing inequities that have to be documented. And so I'm hoping that this report encourages political coalitions across these various communities to consider how they can come together to fight some of these injustices. As you know, and it was really a nice show you had on our friend Mel King, but this was an idea that Mel King gifted to us, and I think these numbers feed into the vision that people like Mel King have for the city of Boston.
The legacy continues.
One of his sayings was, we may have come here in different ships, but we're in the same boat now.
That is 100% true. Having said what you just said about how people are in 2023, in a lot of ways, are still clueless about the Black experience, what questions do you want people to ask themselves?
So the report does end with 7 key questions. And some of this involves self-reflection. But one question, and I guess this is more for the professional community, let me say, or the academic community, how should we count population changes in ways that avoid a presumption that the Black community is monolithic? So that is one sort of self-reflection that I hope people have. And I think a big question, and we did talk about reparations a little bit, is does the media have a responsibility to consider how this expanded Black population diversity has implications for how they report, cover culture, cover events? But the big question, the big self-reflective question that I think people hopefully will ask is, how can our cities take positive advantage of this diverse Black population? This is a resource. So how do we take advantage of this? And again, I don't have specific answers, but there's something in the report that is very hopeful in documenting these kinds of changes.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining us on The Common. This was really, really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's Professor Emeritus at Tufts University and co-author of the report, Great Migration to Global Immigration, A Profile of Black Boston, which is out today, James Jennings. And that's our show today. Thanks so much for listening to The Common. If you have any thoughts on this report, please give us a shout on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at WBUR The Common. You can also send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.